The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is not a recent development. It is rooted in centuries of shared history, cultural ties, and political tensions. Ukraine, once a part of the Soviet Union, declared its independence in 1991. This independence, however, did not erase the deep connections and historical complexities between the two nations. Russia, for its part, has long viewed Ukraine as being within its sphere of influence. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 marked a significant escalation in tensions. This event, condemned by the international community, saw Russia seize and annex the Crimean Peninsula, a Ukrainian territory with a majority Russian population. The annexation was followed by the outbreak of conflict in eastern Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists seized control of parts of the Donbas region. The conflict in eastern Ukraine became a protracted war of attrition, with both sides dug in along heavily fortified front lines. International efforts to broker a lasting ceasefire proved largely unsuccessful, and the conflict continued to simmer for years, claiming thousands of lives and displacing millions of people. On February 24, 2022, the world watched in shock as Russian forces launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This marked a dramatic escalation of the conflict, transforming it from a regional conflict into a major international crisis. Russian President Vladimir Putin justified the invasion as a special military operation aimed at demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine, claims widely dismissed by the international community as baseless pretexts. The invasion sent shockwaves across the world, prompting widespread condemnation and swift economic sanctions against Russia. The United States, the European Union, and their allies imposed unprecedented sanctions targeting Russia's financial system, energy sector, and key industries. Military aid began pouring into Ukraine from Western countries, providing Ukrainian forces with weapons, ammunition, and intelligence to resist the Russian advance. The initial phase of the invasion saw Russian forces make rapid gains, advancing on multiple fronts and capturing key cities in southern and eastern Ukraine. However, the Russian advance was met with fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces and armed civilians who fought back with determination and surprising effectiveness. As of April 2025, the war in Ukraine has entered its fourth year, with no end in sight. The front lines have remained largely static for months, with both sides entrenched in defensive positions. The conflict has settled into a brutal war of attrition, characterized by heavy artillery duels, drone strikes, and sporadic ground offensives. Despite the stalemate, fighting continues to rage in key areas of eastern and southern Ukraine. Russian forces remain focused on capturing the entirety of the Donbas region, while Ukrainian forces are determined to liberate occupied territories and push back Russian gains. The city of Bakhmut has become a focal point of the fighting, with both sides suffering heavy casualties in the battle for control of the strategically important city. The war has also extended beyond Ukraine's borders, with Russia launching missile strikes against critical infrastructure and military targets across the country. These strikes have caused widespread power outages, disrupted supply lines, and resulted in civilian casualties, further deepening the humanitarian crisis. The war in Ukraine has resulted in a staggering human cost. Tens of thousands of civilians have been killed, and the true number is likely much higher but remains difficult to verify amidst the ongoing conflict. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in safer parts of the country or fleeing across the border into neighboring nations. The United Nations estimates that over 10 million Ukrainians have been internally displaced, while over 5 million have fled to neighboring countries such as Poland, Romania, and Moldova. The influx of refugees has strained the resources of host countries, but they have largely responded with compassion and generosity, providing shelter, food, and medical assistance to those in need. The war has had a particularly devastating impact on children, who have been robbed of their childhoods, their education, and in many cases, their loved ones. The psychological trauma of war will likely have long-lasting effects on an entire generation of Ukrainians, even after the fighting eventually ceases.